So, good afternoon. Sami Sahala from Helsinki, from Forum Virium, the city's innovation company. And I will come to this session about squeezing the best out of mobility data collaboration. So, in a minute, what that is all about. But first, some of the housekeeping rules, as you probably already get used to. So, do you know there's a chat box? Feel free to ask questions. I will pick them up. There's polls, but probably not going to use it today. There's people, there's general Q&A. I will monitor these all the time as well. And yes, this is going to be recorded. What else? Yeah, please be mute until you are given the floor. Next slide, please. Yes, then after the session, take a look at what's available. Also, especially emphasizing the networking function. There's others as well. There's not going to be too many sessions after this one, I guess, today. And then there is ability to send direct messages as well. All right, next slide, please. And that was it. So on to the show. We have 3 speakers. We have, me starting with the half-an-hour keynote first. I'll try to keep it in 5 minutes. We have Gemma Schepers from City of Amsterdam, Thibault Castagne from Vianova, and Sebastian Castellanos from NUMO. And more on these people a little bit later. But I will kick it off with a few words why we are here and where does this whole session, the idea of the session, come from. So let me share my screen first. Here we are. You can see it now, I guess. All right. A few years back, with that, I think many cities can, many people can relate to this, but we started to get a whole new wave of new mobility. Let's call it new mobility at this point.
Sami, sorry, you're not sharing the screen yet.
Am I not?
No.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah. That was.
Now, good.
Yeah, now we are. Yeah, my mistake. Sorry about it. Yeah, a few years back, lots of new mobility, which brings lots of new questions, especially from cities. I represent a city here as well. And that means that how do we cope with the new? What does it mean? Do we need to start making new infrastructure? What does it mean for city planning, and so on and so on? Then the questions come to so what is the benefit of all this? Is this something that we can actually gain from? And then when you drill that down even further, you end up with questions about the data side of things. And then you start thinking and asking yourself, and quite often your colleagues and the partner cities and in your network, that so how do we deal with this? What can we get out of this? The data that the new mobility can provide. Is it worth it? And then, of course, the management side of things, operational aspects. How much work is this going to be? How much challenge? And so, if we want to pursue it, so what is required from us? What are the steps that we should take to end up with technological issues and questions? And then you come across MDS. There's no way avoiding it. What is that? What we play with? Is there anything else? So there's lots of question marks out there. And then when you look at MDS, which is American model, so does that apply directly to our city? Can we use it as such? Can we even as a technical format or as a model? How do we operate and cooperate and deal with new mobility? And then that leads to the question that so in Europe, we don't necessarily do things in exactly the same way as they do in the US. So how do we want to play this as cities? What kind of role do we want for cities in this context? And somewhere during these questions, I started to discuss with other cities as well. And namely with Amsterdam, we were having a few chats, well, quite a few actually. So how do we approach this? What do we think about all of this? And Ken found a few other cities in Europe who were already experimenting with MDS. And somewhere along that couple of years ago, we also submitted a proposal for a session, and now we are here. But it's not our little share of things here in Helsinki. Just really a quick recap. We did a pilot last year. We do a lot of this kind of small agile, call it, part of the living lab or mobility living lab activities. So the year it was provided to us by Vianova, and at that point of that was especially to just understand the micromobility Helsinki, the usage of it. So how do people use it? What are the trips that they make? Everything about it. So that was the foremost target one goal for us, analyzing the whole traffic, basically usage of micromobility. And then we wanted to start looking at the governance issues. How do we actually want to do this? And then there was the technological side as well. So governance, we still think governance is a key issue. That was one of the maybe outcomes for us. And there's a number of things there. Let's not go, it could be a separate session altogether. But also just utilizing the data and sharing quite often. We want to, as cities, we want to share the data. And if we only have like for 2 operators that are providing the data, then you can't share it because you don't want, well, the other one doesn't want the other one to see about what level of business they are conducting. So you need more, or you need only one, or you need to come up with new ways of anonymizing and doing all this. And so there's a lot of work in that. Some of the other lessons learned was that yeah, we are quite happy with the dashboards for our monitoring, but of course we need to do a lot of further analysis, and then we need to have proper tools for it. But so we need also to have access to the raw data. It may not be a turnkey solution, at least it wasn't, but then again, we were doing one of the earliest, and it's getting easier by the day, I assume. And the city of Helsinki is making this arrangement permanent, a deal of having that micromobility data in a for different purposes, not just for analysis. We want to do with that, and for that we also maybe need to itself, but we also need to look at the maybe the agreements behind get it, how we get that, because we do have other use cases in mind as well. That was it. Like I said, loads of question marks. We have 3 good presentations and a lively chat to follow to hear answers to all of my questions, hopefully, and also yours. But let's see. So that was it from my side, and let's move on. First, I want to introduce Gemma Schepers from City of Amsterdam. Amsterdam has been doing quite a lot of work lately, and looking at this, like I said, we had this discussion and dialogue with Amsterdam for a while now. Yes. And they've been looking at the technological side, but also the governance side, and it's really interesting stuff. And there's you got 10 minutes to explain everything, right?
Okay. Thank you, Sami, first of all, for your invite to, I hear myself, yeah. Thank you, first of all, for inviting us for this meeting. And yeah, well, I will share my screen and give a little bit of presentation on what is Amsterdam doing at this moment. And I hope then after that we can have a proper discussion. Let me see. Let me share my screen. I hope it's visible for everyone. Well, Amsterdam wants to be the smart mobility city of Europe, and we have a smart mobility program that that we have launched from 2019 to 2025. And well, we have a lot of problems that we're facing in the future. We got a lot of extra people living in Amsterdam. The city is growing. That of course will give us a lot of extra mobility in the city and more traffic. And well, we also want to control all that traffic, and we want to have a livable city where everyone feels comfortable. And that's why we try to think on how the future will be, and we try actually now to build the first stones how we will build the city of the future where everyone can live in a clean city. It's accessible for everyone, and Also, we want to build a bridge between the digital area and also between the physical area in Amsterdam. Well, how are we going to do it? We have three ambitions. Amsterdam is the smart mobility city #1. We are actually in charge of our own digital mobility system, so we are not led by all the big commercial parties, but we are actually in charge ourselves, and that will make that people can live well. I hope have a nice time living and spending time in our city. We do a lot of testing because we see a lot of different mobilities are coming towards us. We do tests with self-driving cars, self-driving boats, shared bikes, scooters, shared cars, even drones, mobility as a service, and logistics, and little e-hubs. And we try to get all those pilots in the city and try how it works and really learn from it. What we also want to do, how do we get in charge of the mobility in our city center? At this moment, we have a mobility center, but what we want to do, we want to work towards a mobility center of the future, where we actually can also be in charge of the city in a digital way, not only on a physical way, but then we can also be in charge in a digital way. And we need to get a lot of data to actually know how traffic in the city just moves. And what we saw is that, how do we get all those data? At this moment, we get a little bit data with all kinds of different endpoints, different types of data. We cannot really compare it. So we were looking for one uniform way to exchange data. That's why we started the project of the CDSM. It's comparable with the American MDS, and it's a data standard where we actually want to collect data on the same way within the city from different mobility providers, but also this uniform data standard we can also apply to other cities. So we can also share insights with other cities in the Netherlands and even in Europe. And the argumentation, why actually do we need one kind of standard? We did a big research. My colleague Guusje did a European research on what are the needs in Europe, and is there a need for one data standard? And we saw that at this moment it's a really good timing, and everyone is actually having the same problems in every city. So there is an urgency and need, and we want to, for example, don't want to have troubles with parking all the mobility devices in the city, but you want to maybe geofence all the parking of the shared bikes or the scooters. The vision of Amsterdam is not only the Netherlands, but also in Europe, because we see that all the mobility providers not only offering their services in the Netherlands, but also in other European cities. So we want to actually share our data. And the other thing is, what we also want to do is we want to have a two-way communication, not only that the mobility providers give data to us, but we also want to geofence and send our data to mobility providers and really work together in the same environment. Therefore, we see a few opportunities, clear use case mapping. We want to cooperate among all stakeholders. There's a really good timing for it at this moment. And we also need a strong legal framework. I think the security and privacy issues will come up in the discussion later. We also have some bottlenecks. Actually, the bottlenecks are the privacy discussions. There's another bottleneck that a lot of governance in the Netherlands are really behind the way of data approach working. They're really policy minded, they're not data minded. So we need to, there's a gap between it, there's a bridge we need to build between policy and data. And we also need to work with trusted third parties for data processing, and that is, I think, also a really nice challenge. The thing of uniform data, it will help us to really plan the city, to make policy in the city, and also to enforce, for example, permits, and to set rules and regulation. That will really help us to control the city a little bit more. And I will start sharing my screen. if it really works. Yes. Okay. Yes, I'm back. And what we want to do actually as a city of Amsterdam, really work together in Europe, work within the Netherlands cities, and try to test and really learn from mobility that we see that will get in the future, so we can really manage the city. And I think from there we can start a discussion from the governmental perspective.
I promised you 10 minutes. I promised to cut you off at 10 minutes, but I didn't have to. That was thank you very much.
Okay.
So I mentioned that we did a pilot with Vianova. Gemma just mentioned third parties as well. So I will not ask you questions about that. I will later on. But let's give floor to Thibault Castagne from Vianova to share a little bit the third party perspective. You've been mentioned now twice. So how do you see all this?
Thank you, Sami, for the introduction. And thank you, Gemma, for opening the floor. So I will try to keep it at best 8 minutes. I'm looking at the clock now. So my name is Thibault Castagne. I'm the founder of Vianova. And indeed, we started collaboration with Helsinki last year. And in a nutshell, basically, Vianova is a data platform for cities to build and manage the future of so the startup is 2 years old. We are what we call the GovTech startup, which does exist. That's the startup that actually serve public sector. And we are 18 employees based actually like across Europe today. And we are the leading mobility management solution platform in Europe today, working with 15 cities. So I guess, as was mentioned earlier, mobility services are changing very rapidly with free-floating on-demand mobility, but also like last-mile deliveries. So traffic management as well as curbside management is being heavily challenged in cities. Though like the big opportunity today for local governments and transport authorities is data. Data will come from connected vehicles and are a great way basically for cities to sort of size, again, the control over the way public space is being shared and steer sustainable mobility. The premise data today is that first there is a business issue in terms of licensing this data as well as sourcing this data, and this data is often in silos. There's a technical issue which shouldn't be like undercover. It's integration and standardization, and there's a regulatory issue around data security and privacy protection. So basically how we act as Vianova, we act as a trusted third party between mobility fleets and cities. We provide a city data platform that enables bilateral data sharing, as basically Gemma was explaining earlier. So we actually collect data from mobility fleets that we aggregate on behalf of the city on a dashboard, as well as we allow cities basically to create regulations and share that with mobility fleets, geofence regulations. So it's basically an open platform powered by the city with full data governance on the city side, GDPR compliant data exchange, as well as using like open source mobility data formats, so MDS, GBFS, and hopefully very soon CDSM that was introduced also by Amsterdam. So it looks like that. It's basically web dashboard, mobility and infrastructure management. So we collect data not only from mobility services, but also from infrastructure, connected infrastructure. So this data is being used for analysis and planification, for regulations, but also for audit, monitoring, and contract management. So in the last 2.5 years, we worked with 15 European cities. So we've got quite an experience, I would say, in terms of setting up this data platform for cities and helping them basically fulfilling their use case. We've seen obviously the industry changing, and we're very pleased to see that it's changing in the right direction. There's a lot more maturity, from 2.5 years ago, like I remember August 2019 when we started the implementation of MDS in Brussels and Faro in Portugal. Wow, what a pain it was. These first cities basically took the pain before the others. But that was, I think, the way the industry was evolving, and now we see that cities are becoming the main client for operators. So operators are much more inclined basically to work with cities in data sharing and so on. They constructively basically collaborate with cities. And the good thing is that also cities are sharing much more to each other, which is also like enabled by a service where they have like a platform to basically share their success stories. Data quality is improving, significantly improving, but still basically lagging. That's basically one of the challenge today of our job, is making sure the data is of high quality, and generally data privacy and GDPR understanding is also improving, which is also very good. So in terms of like how would guide a city now to start with is priority 0, like establish basically your urban mobility plan, which is, what do you want to do? What's your strategy in terms of mobility and specifically shared mobility? From that, you issue a regulatory framework that basically fit into that strategic vision. You've got great papers. I'm going to do some commercial promotion about our papers now, which are basically you can find on the library, approach to tenders and finding the best partner, which was distributed on the police group, but also like a police paper that was done for micromanaging micromobility. Priority 1 is, what data for what? So which data for which purpose? Meaning like first defining why, defining these use cases to make sure that you're transparent with operators, prioritizing your need from the mobility team as well as GDPR obligations. So those developing these use cases are extremely important to start a mobility data project. And you can also consult in this link here some use cases that we put through and tested with these 15 cities. So use cases can be like everything from monitoring, so daily monitoring, movements of shared mobility, use of the curb. There could be planning use cases like infrastructure, how am I creating mobility hubs, cycling lanes, etc. Enhancing, so basically like if I have equity goals, how can I promote these equity goals by setting up basically the right policies, and management, which is basically like tagging e-scooters that could be parked in front of a hospital and making sure that this vehicle is basically being removed. So in terms of example, it comes from like safety, like using like micromobility telemetries to build new cycling lanes in Brussels, creating geofence regulation to promote better parking in Northamptonshire, helping them basically creating these incentivized parking zones to have a clear public space, as well as allowing basically cities to directly tag vehicles to be relocated by operators, so a full workflow and management with the operators, as well as basically looking at sustainability KPIs, or how many basically trips are starting from the main like regional or city hubs, and as an example of Helsinki, and looking at commuting for e-scooters, like how much commuting does it represent e-scooters and how much are actually leisure trips. And another example is actually logistics, which again are last mile deliveries. So a big project we're working on with Paris now is about basically collecting and processing data from last mile delivery services, like with the likes of FedEx, DHL, or La Poste, etc., by looking at how they're actually using the curb space, and looking at which kind of vehicles are coming to the city, delivery, and so on, and how we can better coordinate, optimize the use of public space. So cities have to think also like a bit like further down the line about like which sort of devices are they going to be managing in 5 years, not only like shared micromobility, but like maybe like the first like test of AVs, good deliveries, on-demand transit, micro-transit, etc. So they have to look priority to us, how to work with operators in setting up the data sharing. So it means like setting up the data requirements as part of your permit and license, making sure that you develop the right GDPR compliance data collection and processing framework. This is called the PIA. Develop transparent policies for operators to follow, promote good collaboration with those operators and kind of like a loop of collaborations and creating these engagements with them to get the feedback, and also auditing operators' data and auditing operators' compliance, which are very important, and make the accuracy of data part of the permit. So where we basically act as Vianova, as I said, like we do have like a growing set of data agreements with operators. It helps operators also because they have only one data agreement. They have a trusted GDPR compliant party. They have transparent policies and auditing, which are the same basically across all the cities. So they know basically like how they can, how the cap is being calculated, how the infringements on parking zone is being calculated, and so on. And yeah, they trust basically the way that we're handling their data. And the question now is like, priority 3 is like, how am I handling this data? You've got 3 different choices. The first one is like in-house development, which basically like require large IT capacity, which is now. And then you have to think about building this as the next generation city traffic management system. So you're probably going to have to multiply by 10 or 50 the number of people working on this next traffic management system that basically will manage down the line all connected mobility. However, like you do have a product that fits exactly the need of the city, which basically is on a positive side. The question is like, again, how do you share the cost between other cities? On the second side is hire consultants to develop it for the city. And when you look at the daily rate of the likes of Capgemini and Accenture for every maintenance upgrade that you want to do, then you're not too sure that taxpayers' money is actually being spent in the right way. And the second thing is like using a third-party developer, third-party software like Vianova. And again, the good thing is that the cost is shared between many cities. So you actually amortize the cost between 15, 20, 100 cities. And you benefit from the wide cross experience of use cases between cities. However, you do have to pay attention to certain things, making sure that you've got transparent calculations and openness in terms of the data pipeline, making sure you've got openness of the data, so open API for you to basically visualize all the data and the calculation that is being needed, and the right support. I also see a lot of confusion in the industry about open data, open source, open platform, which are 3 different things. Open data is about sharing data openly to the public. Open source is different licensing of open source, and open platform is basically making sure that the data is available to the customers in a full way. And that's it for me. Thank you very much, and you can reach out to me through these details here for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Thibault. Actually, there were way too much on the slides, so I couldn't write everything down to have. But then again, this session is too short to ask all the questions I have in mind. But let's move on. We will get to the questions shortly. Thank you. Now, whereas Helsinki and Amsterdam have been looking at this from say one city point of view, and Thibault is now working with many cities and has got a much better overview of what cities want. Then again, we have Sebastian, who has made an actual study about it and had way bigger view on bigger perspective than we do. And then that's basically now is the time to hear all about it. And then we move on to kind of pinpoint all these questions. Over to you, Sebastian.
Thank you, Sami. So I'm also going to share my screen, and I have a few slides I'm going to share with you. So thank you for to this session. We're really excited. It's a topic that I'm very passionate about. So I really love talking about data. So, very quickly about NUMO, which is where I work. NUMO is the New Urban Mobility Alliance. We're an alliance organization that we work around tech-based disruptions in transportation. And we're really looking to create joyful cities. So that's kind of like the first thing we want to do. We want to make sure that people are enjoying their lives in cities. And of course, we want this to happen in a sustainable and just way for everyone. We're kind of like based off of these mobility principles, what we call the shared mobility principles for livable cities. There's a set of 10 principles that we put together with a set of other nonprofit and NGO organizations, really thinking about the challenges that we would be facing with all these new technologies that are coming to our cities. So, getting into the topic, I think Sami, you were starting to talk about this, how, we have so many different new technologies, and in particular, micromobility, these shared bikes and scooters that really came very, very quickly to our cities. So, in less than 3 years, because these modes have only been available for, 3 to 4 years, we have already 500 cities worldwide that have some sort of deployment of this. And even during the COVID pandemic, we saw that, after a few of them had stopped, very, very quickly, they rebounded back. And now we are seeing, a rebound of all these modes coming again back to our cities. However, there's still a lot of questions right now about, are these modes Are they bad? Are they helping us? Are they not helping us? And the way we tend to think about this is really about those social goals that we're trying to pursue as cities, right? And so we think about, equity. Are these modes being used in an equitable manner? Helping us? Are they helping people access the things that they want to access? Are they safe modes? Are they really, safe not only for the writers, but are they safe for everyone else? And of course, we can't leave the environment part out of it. Are these modes that are good, or are they bad for the environment? So these are questions that I think we all have about these modes, and it's not only about scooters or bikes, but it's really about what Gemma was telling us about the drones and the autonomous boats and all these different things that we don't really know. There's so many questions. They're so new that we don't have the answer to all of these questions. And what we have seen, and in particular for micromobility, is that cities have been reacting very differently, right? And this is a response to not really knowing if these are good or bad. So we have some cities that are, banning these modes. Scooters are bad, and we don't want them here. We have seen others that are saying, okay, maybe they are bad, but we're going to wait and see what happens. Cities that have taken no action, cities that have, started negotiating directly with these private operators, and others that have taken a bit more of a proactive approach, and they have, created permits or deeper regulations. So we actually did look at some of the regulations around the world, and we have all this data that you can look, that you can check out here in this link below. So we looked at how cities had been reacting to this, and one of the things that we noticed was that data was one of those key things that cities were reacting to and were regulating. So you can see here a map of how different policies around the world were reacting to this specific topic. And we see that majority of cities, less so in Europe, but a majority of cities were requiring some sort of data sharing agreement with these private operators with scooters and bikes. So, I think the question that people were asking when cities were requiring this data, and I think Thibault, you were alluding to this a bit, is why are cities requiring this, right? What purpose does requiring data from a city perspective help the city do? So, and I have here a couple of examples of how this question evolved so quickly from the American perspective. So, in 2019, cities were starting to get together and seeing, okay, how can we figure this out between all ourselves? And again, going back, I think to Thibault, what you were saying, that cities can share the burden of understanding all of these modes together. This is what cities were trying to do, right? Like, what do we do with these scooters? But in less than a year's time, we already saw a reaction by other types of stakeholders, by the ACLU, which is a civil liberties organization in the U.S., suing Los Angeles because of the data that they were requiring, which they saw as infringing in privacy rights of individuals. So it's a topic that was evolving and is still evolving very, very fast. And I think the tricky part about this topic, when it comes in particular to privacy, is that cities, whether that's fair or not, and I think that's a different question, but cities are held to a higher standard, right? When people say Uber or whatever company is data, they know who we are, they know our names, they pretty much know where we live, they have our credit card information. We don't really stop to think about it, right? It's a private company, like it's fine, like we need that to have the service that we want. But when it comes to cities, the bar is definitely set much higher. So there is that expectation of privacy, and like you as a citizen, would you expect the government to have all that private information about you, and how can the government then use that against you, perhaps? And I think a useful question to be asking ourselves about this is, would a car driver expect that the government knows exactly where they're moving? And I think probably the answer is no. So that's something about equity that we need to think about. Second question that we've heard is really capacity. Do governments really have the capacity to use all these data? I think, Gemma, you were again talking a bit about this, how you want Amsterdam to have that capacity and to build that capacity. I think that's something worthwhile pursuing. But also, and Thibault, you were also asking about this, how do governments actually know where they're using this data? And that was the first, big priority that you were setting. Governments really need to understand why they're using this data. And finally, there's this legality question, and is there really precedent for governments to have access to these data? And in the US, there's a lot of discussion around, legal discussion around that topic, and it's topics that have actually gone to the Supreme Court to try to be answered. So, starting from these questions, this is kind of like where we started from. We were hearing, a lot of people saying, oh, but cities really, why do they want these data? Like, why do they have access to these data? So what we did was, in our research project, we put together a group of different stakeholders. And again, this is going back to your presentation, Thibault, about, putting together a group of people that can help you think about this. So this is what we did. We put together a group of different stakeholders that included cities, included universities, it included some of the companies, and it also included some, of the people that are more on the privacy side of things and that are defending privacy. So we got all these people together and we asked the question, okay, why is data important for cities and what can cities get out of these data? So this is the question where we started, and we put together what we are calling these use cases. So use cases are really just, understanding how from the policy goals that cities are trying to pursue, we can identify what is the data that is needed. So this is basically the process that we follow. We identified first those policy goals. And the policy goals, and this came by consensus, is what I showed you in my previous slide, which is, equity, safety, and environment. These are things that, regardless of where you are in the world, these are things that cities mostly are trying to pursue. So this is something that doesn't really change that much. Of course, there might be others that you can add on to here, but these are the ones that we, by consensus, identified as the goals that cities are really pursuing right now. After identifying those high-level objectives, we then we produced a bit of more specific objectives that apply directly to these new mobility technologies. So when it comes to, for example, equity, we identified 3 things. If you're thinking about equity in new mobility, you're thinking about people being able to access what they need. So this is what we refer to here as access to necessities. Are these modes actually helping people to get to where they need? So if someone needs to go to the doctor, is a scooter helping them do that? Is a scooter helping them go to grocery shopping, or is it not? So that's the first thing when it comes to equity. The second part is really people being able to access those services themselves. So if these services are only being deployed through cell phones, does everyone have a cell phone? Does everyone have access to a data plan that can help them access that service? So that's the second thing we think about. And then the third thing is really the access to vehicles. Are these vehicles being deployed equitably around the city? So are they being deployed in both rich and poor parts of the city? And what we were seeing in the initial stages of deployment of new mobility and of shared mobility was that this wasn't the case, right? These modes were being deployed in the richest parts of the city or the more touristy parts of the city. And this helped, understanding this helped cities create regulations that would, fight against that. So this is really the first part, really identifying what are those goals that cities are trying to pursue. The second part that we did, or the second step that we did for our project, was really identifying how can you evaluate if these things are really helping or hindering those goals. So we created a set of questions. Again, I'm just going deeper into the equity question here, but we developed a set of questions that would help cities understand if these modes are helping or hindering. So again, the questions are very basic. Does this service help me increase access? Does it help me, integrate with transit? Does it help me achieve serving underserved neighborhoods? So, very basic questions, but were needed for cities to really articulate why these modes were helping or not helping them in their goals. The third part was really getting into the evaluation. How do we evaluate as cities if these modes are helping us or hindering our goals? So this is getting much more into how permitting processes or how governance or regulatory processes can be crafted by cities. So if you're a city and you're trying to, again, help create a permit or create some sort of regulation, you can come to these metrics and say, okay, evaluate these different metrics and see if these modes are helping me in my equity purposes, for example. So, going back to this example of equity, we looked at, for example, trip use cases. So how are people actually using these modes in terms of data? What percentage of trips are what percentage of the trips are starting at education, healthcare, grocery stores, or other necessities that people are trying to access that are being done in actually underserved communities or not. And really, all of this gets us to the data. So all of these things, all of these questions, all of these metrics can be answered through data. And that is the last part of what we did for our research project. We identified what data is really required. So what this allows, we connect all that data and connect the data that cities are requiring right now to actual policy goals, because this is the goal finally of a city, to pursue social goals that we are all interested in pursuing. So, we created that connection between that data and those goals. And this was really the objective of our project. So, these are a couple of examples of cities that have been using this tool. This is an online tool that we have that it's open to everyone. I forgot to mention, but NUMO is a nonprofit organization, so everything we do is open to everyone. We're not interested in selling anything that we're doing. Everything is completely free to access. So these are just a couple of examples of cities that have been using our tools to create their permits and to really make that link between policy and data. So yeah, you can access this tool and all of our research here on this link. And we have this tool that we call leveraging data to achieve policy outcomes. So yeah, thank you very much. So happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. First question: what is needed from a city to start using it? Everything is there behind that link, or is there something else that we need to have an agreement or something?
Absolutely not. Everything a city would need to really understand, how if the city, has a clarity on the goal. And again, Gemma, you showed us a bit of the goals that you're trying to pursue. Then you can start really going into the tool and looking at the different, objectives, goals, and then the data that you need. So everything is there. We would, of course, be happy to work with any city on the line. And again, we do this free of charge. We're just happy to support you in this endeavor.
That sounds like a good offer. Thank you. Keep that in mind. All right, let's invite also Gemma and Thibault back as well. Now it's time to do a proper discussion, right? And I also realized that I made some funny remarks, but not really introduced you properly. So let's do a first try to get all your mics open to get a quick round at who you are, where do you actually work with, and what's your title? I don't even have all the titles. You start.
Yes, I work in the city of Amsterdam for our innovation team. I work in a team of smart mobility, and I'm a project lead. I run 2 projects: cybersecurity and smart mobility for the Netherlands, and I'm the project lead for the CDSM, the data standard that we're developing. And at this moment, Sebastian, we are doing 4 use cases in 4 cities in the Netherlands to really test and apply the data standard, and also to understand what cities really need for policy and what data they want to do. So that's are the projects that I'm running at this moment.
Thibault.
Yes, so I'm Thibault. I'm the CEO and founder of Vianova. So I'm actually based in Paris, and I look after mostly business development and product development in the company. And previously, I was working in an investment fund investing in sustainable energy.
Sebastian.
Cool. Yes, Sebastian Castellanos. I work for NUMO, the New Urban Mobility Alliance. We're a nonprofit organization. We're based in Washington, D.C. And yeah, I lead our research efforts. So everything related to new data and new insights that we want to get out of some of these new modes.
And yes, hi, Sami from the city of Helsinki, or Forum Virium, the city's innovation agency, innovation company, to be frank. Smart mobility expert of every kind in that place. To get things started, I have now a few pages of questions I wrote down, just in case. Let's start in reverse order. Actually, a couple of things for Sebastian first. All this time, I've been thinking that it's not hugely new phenomena that we get some new mobility services around, and why do we need to? Do we have to rethink and kind of invent the wheel again? Like in your study, did you come across have cities, or did you make some analogies between this like e-scooters, the new micromobility, and the city bikes, it was only a few years ago when we got all of a sudden huge amounts of Chinese, quite often Chinese city bikes, and all of a sudden they were gone as well in many cases. And then there's lots of similarities, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, this is something that cities have been struggling with, right? Because these are things that come very, very fast. And what we have been seeing is that, for example, a few cities still had, the PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorder from Uber, right? And from so they were still trying to like process what had happened before that. So they were indeed they were a bit more prepared for this new round of innovations that were the bikes and later the scooters. But still, these things come so fast that no one was expecting that. And I think that is really the challenge when it comes to creating new regulations moving forward. Can you really, as a city, start thinking a bit more proactively about the things that you want to do? And I think, really the example that, for example, Los Angeles is giving, or, Gemma in Amsterdam is giving, is really good, because what you're thinking ahead, right? You're not thinking about, how do we do with what's happening right now, but how do we actually do with what is going to come later, whether we know what it is or not. And this is something actually that we love to use an analogy for this, which is, today you have scooters, tomorrow you'll have drones, but the day after tomorrow you will have magic carpets, right? You'll have a company that will invent a magic carpet that's floating around the city, and then what do you do with that? So you really need to start preparing from now. And all these things about thinking about how you're going to manage data is something that will probably not change, right? There are other things that won't change. You will have to think about what space will I give these modes in the city? Are we going to share this space with cars? Are we going to share this space with pedestrians? Are we going to share the airspace? So all of these things that are not really going to change. So I think that is really the challenge, and I do see cities really stepping up and really understanding that what is happening with scooters right now is just the start, but is the way that they are going to plan and really prepare themselves for what will be coming next.
Yeah, and I think there's only one thing certain in mobility nowadays is that there's going to be change. There's somebody coming up with new innovation all the time. Think of 5 years, 10 years back, there wasn't too much to write about. Now there's no way to catch up with all the articles in different papers on new mobility. It's different times. Another question that linking to that I had in my mind that again, thinking multiple new initiatives over the years, thinking of like journey planning, city bikes, mobility service, and there's always been kind of shifting emphasis on is it going to be a public model or private model, and it's been going up and down in the same city. It's different cities are taking different kind of approach. And thinking of journey planning, that was we've had them 20 plus years now, and that say business ecosystem is still changing. How do you, all of you, how do you see this? Where is this leading? And is it going to be kind of settled in some kind of mode or not? Or does it have to? Who's going to start? Just go ahead.
I can just give my feeling is also like the position of cities are becoming extremely central now. The interests and I fear for you guys, because I feel like the interest that you would have from so many parties basically wants to run the business in the city, and you're gonna have to adapt extremely quickly basically to all these requests coming out. But obviously my approach is that private-public partnerships should become key also in making sure that as a city governance, basically govern all the innovation from the private sector, and making sure that this innovation is being served for the policy goals that actually Sebastian was mentioning earlier. So it's the role of a city basically will move from an operator role about operating actually transport to basically a governor role about how do you actually govern the mobility system and manage basically contracts as well as auditing these businesses or services coming into the city.
Sami, you're muted. Thibault, of course, we see the same problem. We see a lot of external mobility parties coming to the city of Amsterdam and asking to put their service into the city. And we cannot provide permits to every mobility party to provide a service in the city. And I think the role of the city is really to manage the public space and also to manage the digital space and to keep our citizens safe and to provide them a really nice city to live in. And therefore, we need to set rules and regulations. And we need to work really closely with mobility parties and market parties because they are really offering their services. And at this moment, we really try to work in ecosystems together with the commercial parties because we see they're really offering everything and we only need to manage everything. And the data standard that we are developing is really a cooperation between the mobility parties, the data providers, and the cities, because we all need each other in this ecosystem. And I think everyone will have the same goal in the end to have a city to live in and a really nice ecosystem that's safe and clean and for everyone to live in. Therefore, we really need each other. So, Thibault, of course, that's also why we are having a lot of chats to work together and how we can manage it and which steps we need to make to get that done.
I would just add something to that, which is, something interesting about the private operators that are coming to cities right now, which is that some sort of alignment in the goals that cities and these private operators have. So if you think about, whether it's Uber, whether it's ride hailing, whether it's scooters, bikes, everyone is interested in taking trips away from cars, right? And the city too. So there is an interest. Even if it's a short-term alignment, it's something that should be, taking advantage of. So because it's not always that the private and public sector see eye to eye in the same goals. So I do totally agree with Thibault what you're saying that there needs to be a collaboration, and in the places that we've been working at, for example, just yesterday we had a session with Mexico City, and they found much more success working closely with some of the scooter operators. And those are the operators that today are doing much better, the ones that they collaborated actively with the city.
Yeah, that was like I mentioned in my first words as well, that was part of what we were discussing with Amsterdam a few years back, that we were looking at MDS, we were looking at US, and the starting point was there was no word collaboration in there. And we're used to working in a different way. And then we have, cities are different, the local regulations are different. On the other end of scale is Helsinki, where it's all about national legislation. We don't have any kind of leverage on these companies. Anybody can basically come to streets of Helsinki and start the mobility business. So basically, we are forced to collaborate. But then again, we like that as well. Like Gemma said, I think it's our benefit. There's much more to gain. What else? Maybe picking that up, something that was in Thibault's slides was that you have three options. You have you build yourself in-house or you hire consultants to do something like this. Then you can resort to third-party software. And again, there I was thinking back with like analogy to, for example, journey planning, where we also had another option: don't do anything. And we still have cities who never invested anything in journey planners. Let Google and Citymapper and what else to take care of it and in due time. And that maybe has worked for them, I'm not sure. But then again, they also don't have too much interaction. They can't really influence on that service at all, or in a really modest way. Now, in the context of this session, this topic, do we have an option that we don't have to do anything? Will time take care of it? Will it just sort it out itself? Is that an option even? I know people will say.
Yes. I think the example I would take here is the example of Waze, for instance. So the question is like, as a city, do you have to do the technology or do you have to do the governance? So like, do you want to invest into like a navigation system for cars? Probably not. I mean, that's like, millions, if not billions of investment in R&D, and so on, right? And customer acquisition and so on. So do you want to invest in this or not? Maybe not. But what you want to invest in is making sure basically that you have the right legislation for ways or for routing of cars.
Is that Sebastian?
There was a helicopter echo.
Yeah.
So what you want to make sure is that you have the right legislation, so you can basically say that, on that streets, just that amount of vehicles can basically be rerouted in front of the schools at 3 or 4 p.m. when the school closed and then the kids are coming out. So the legislation and the governance should be in the hands of cities. And I think that's also where the effort should be in, because as you mentioned, like Helsinki probably do not have the city legislation, but I would argue that I think you're good for now. Let's see in 5 to 10 years if that's when you're gonna have maybe in the same position as Amsterdam. Then you're gonna have every day basically like someone knocking at your door and be, by the way, I'm just gonna set up this and set up that, and I'm just gonna use your public space here and your public space here. And at this point, you're probably gonna have to have the right framework, to handle.
You do, Gemma.
Yeah, I really agree. I think that we need to invest absolutely in rules, in privacy, in security, and to keep the citizens and the city safe. But I also think that we need to invest in employees within a city that understand data, that understand technology a little bit, that really can read data. Because if we as employees don't understand what technology is, and if we don't understand what data is and how we can analyze data and how we can use it, then we also don't know how to write the rules. And as we see that technology is really developing and we get new mobility concepts and we get more data and we get new technology, I think we need to be prepared as cities to really understand it. You don't have to do everything by yourself, but you need to at least know what's going on and know how to react on it and know how to act on it, and put some things in rules and regulation to really be in charge of the city and not let the city be in the hands of mobility providers or the Googles or the Ubers. You want to regulate a little bit. So I think you need to invest in technology and technology-minded employees.
True. But then question of the regulation. What level of regulation should we have? And also in terms of local, regional, national, European-wide, probably all of that. But how do you divide that? But who should be in the driver's seat in Europe?
I have some thoughts about that, definitely. And again, it's taking the example of what we're seeing right now. Again, if you take the example of what we're seeing right now as a way to prepare for what might be coming next, we do see right now that there are some like higher level regulations at the national or international level about safety, for example, right? So there are things about the devices themselves and things about the safety of the devices, and that is definitely something that is the role of national or broader European Union governments. But when it comes to the operation, that is definitely something that is so different at each local level that I do think that has to be the role of those more local entities. And I just going back, I guess, to the previous question, I think we all understand the role of government as that steward of of public space, of those social goals. So that should be the role of that local government to really ensure that those goals are being pursued with anything new that is coming to them.
Yeah. Well, then thinking back to US and with MDS now being used for a number of years, as I understand, there are cities that are more aggressive, if that's the right word for it, and then there's cities that are much more collaborative and still are using MDS. How's that working out? Is everything fine in that sense? In terms of local regulation, and still we can manage using MDS. Well, MDS not even at the point here, but like, how is it working out in a bigger scheme?
Yeah, definitely. And I do think, that also goes back to the fact that not every city, as, Gemma, or has the right resources to tackle some of these issues, right? So yeah, you have cities like Los Angeles, which is, a very well-staffed city that has a lot of, budget to do some of these things and to try different things out. And they are the ones that are, for example, leading the way in some of these things, including MDS, right? But what is interesting to me about what is happening in the US is that there is a lot of peer collaboration between cities. So, you have Los Angeles that, they develop the MDS and then they put it into this nonprofit organization. And that nonprofit organization has a lot of different cities that joined or did join part of that organization.
And it's going global. We are
and it's going global. Exactly.
Well.
Yeah, exactly. So I really do think, that is a very interesting model, that it's, fairly new. I think, I don't know any other examples of something like that is happening. And that it I think serves the purpose that we're seeing, cities really taking the driver's seat in the governance of these new technologies, and really setting the rules and setting, how these private operators are going to operate in their jurisdictions.
We do have, say, city level collaboration here as well, like Helsinki and Amsterdam are just one example, but there's like constant dialogue all around. And I think we've had that before, but I think this is a good example of something new, and then we are facing something new, and then clearly we have been picking up the pace on all that dialogue between us, and that I think that's a good thing. Gemma.
I totally agree. I see collaboration coming our way. I see in the Netherlands with the standards, we're actually working with 4 cities to develop and apply to develop the standard and to apply it and test it. And we have 4 different use cases. So we really try to learn from each other, and everyone doing something else, but together we are really making the next step. And it's not only in the Netherlands, but with this standard, we also bring it to Europe and really working also in with European cities. And we have the discussion in European cities to develop technology and to understand how the smart mobility environment is actually acting and where it's developing towards. And well, actually, I see that's really. I see that's improving much more. I think we also see the urgency and the need, because I think also it's maybe a better timing to work together. So I see that happening. I don't know what about you, Thibault, because you are with your MDS, you are really working in all the different European cities. So you maybe can really see how we're working together from your perspective from a data processor party.
Yeah, so actually when we started, there was only MDS available, right? So so we could only use that. And to be fair, it's such a great thing for the industry that we have data standards. We, from every level, from the operator level that basically can plug into any city, sharing the data in the same ways, like consistency in terms of like auditing KPIs, and also basically for you cities, because at the end of the day, like if you're not happy with the data processor, you can just basically cut it. You're gonna get exactly the same feed, exactly the right KPIs coming in, and it's there is no lock-in. So that's also like very interesting. And yeah, in our cities, so I take an example like with fees. So fees reconciliation and how basically like cities can use fees for like equity goals or like specifically actually for equity goals. And for instance, like we see it with Malmö and Stockholm, that now implementing these fees, with different zones in the city, depending on like city centers, like outside suburban areas, to make sure that basically the fleet like widen basically in these like other areas. So like all this knowledge basically like are coming out and being tested by certain cities, and then we try basically to make sure that cities can create themselves contents. Share that with other cities about, hey, that's how it worked, that's what didn't work, and so on and so on. So we see that cross collaboration happening. And yeah, obviously, like one of the great platform in Europe is Police, which also helps a lot on making sure that cities basically can talk to each other. But yeah, that's definitively. At the moment, I feel it's very country level. At the European level, like we do have like EU-driven like conferences and so on that happening, but we see a lot of like sharing between cities like Basel, Zurich, Gothenburg, Malmö, Stockholm, Lyon, Marseille, Grenoble, Bordeaux. We see like basically this sharing in the country. Maybe it could be broader at a European sense. Yeah.
Well, speaking of standards, I have so many questions about this topic. But we have MDS, we have CDS, and we have different things coming up also from the city side, thinking of parking, for example, that may or may not apply to micromobility, but it applies to, for example, other shared mobility. And then there's work to do. There's standardization is not all there. Where do you see this leading? But then again, especially Thibault, not just the standards. I think there's no question that they are needed. But should there be more harmonizing across cities in other aspects, thinking of like, maybe agreement models? How different are we actually?
You mean
the cities? Yeah.
Harmonizing standards, you mean?
Not standards, the other aspects of how do we conduct our work? How do we come across? How do we operate? Like we do have to do agreements between the different stakeholders. City needs to have agreements with the micromobility providers, for example. And there's going to be differences based on local regulation. Is there need for more harmonizing in that sense? Not just the standards themselves, but the other aspects of our operation. Would it make your life easier, or the micromobility providers' life easier?
So I mean, as far as I'm concerned, as far as we are concerned at Vianova, like we do, so we either like do have like direct agreement with the operator, or on top of that we have 3-party agreement with the city involved. Those are the same templates. So all the cities today are using like the same templates, which basically been reviewed by a lot of like legal departments. So they're the ones that we used today. Yeah.
So you've actually managed to have that same template to work in every city. That's amazing. To be honest, knowing the cities a little bit.
Yeah, roughly. But I have to say, like, it's a lot of it's painful. That's why we always
that's what I
agreement with the operator, because then it's every data agreement is like 1 month, 1 month and a half, or 2 months, or even 6 months of work with American companies. Sorry about that, because then we have to go back to like the legal department in the US and back and so on. So it's like it delays a lot of the project, and in the GDPR understanding in the US like that. You have that agreement that basically specified by GDPR and like the terms and so on. You bring this basically to US lawyers. They have no clue about it, So or a lot of them do not have any clue. So there's definitively like So I mean, I guess that's one of the things that we provide. But there's definitively consistencies to have on these data agreements, and maybe the industry should come with like a template or something like this.
But I do think that's an interesting point, just because there are only regulation is limited, right? Regulation in the world is a spectrum, right? Is from like no regulation or from letting anyone do whatever they want to like banning, right? So there's a spectrum. It's a spectrum. It's not something unlimited. So I do think it's an interesting idea what you're proposing, because the tools that cities have are limited, and it could they could be replicated across. I'm not sure I have seen so many of those things happening other than those informal collaboration between cities where they talk about like, how are you doing this, how are you doing that, but perhaps more formal than that.
Yeah. But people in your slide, there was also that the maturity is especially. How far are we? How much further we need to go?
So first, two things basically, like like the CDSM of Amsterdam in Europe is not far from MDS basically. So in terms of like CDSM, you actually use Metrics API, which Metrics API is basically already aggregated data versus MDS provider API, which is raw data in this case. Right. But to answer your questions, you do have then the same KPIs calculation. and you could even you could collect data, but then as part of the sort of this foundation, you would always calculate the KPIs in the same way. So you do have basically that consistency. And in terms of maturity, again, obviously the discussion in the OMF, but also other discussion that we have with American counterparts, I think Europe shouldn't shy away where they are at the moment. I think especially in terms of policies, if you actually look at the number of vehicles and number of trips, Europe is way in front of US right now in terms of micromobility trips. It's much more active market. It's a better fit basically in micromobility trips, in Europe than in the US. And we see, at least with the city that we work with, a lot of new ideas coming up in policies, which we don't yet see any implementation in the US, So that's why I'm saying the maturity is coming. And I think they also in cities, they've worked to make sure that they also have much more flexible legislation, which is a very important part to make sure that they can act quite quickly on setting up new policies.
Yeah, but Gemma, what you've been doing is not just the CDSM. It's not just a technical standard. It has everything to do with the local policies and many things.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, of course. We do a lot, and I think I wanted to say to answer on Thibault. We know we have the MBS standard from the USA, and we are developing the CDSM from very small. We only have a few data questions there. And what we want to do, we really want to start from the use case based on what is needed and what cities are really needing. And I think we also collaborate together with the OMF and the MBS standards to really develop from the use case base what is needed for the cities and how we can make that next step. And I think in the next coming few months, we're really going to, the plan is to work together with MBS and to really see how we can help each other in making in developing the standards. And our vision is really policy based because there's a need to be a direct question from cities on what kind of data they want and how they're going to use it and how they're going to analyze it and how then they're going to put it in their new policy and how they're going to put it in new permits. That also is going to be a very long way. I mean, we also see that Thibault is really actually waiting for us to start, and we cannot go that fast because the government's not always that fast. I have really good hopes that we within I think 1 year, half a year, we really have a new standard that really it's confirm all the GDPR standards, cybersecurity standards, policy-based and really close to MBS, that you have a kind of flexible standards that you can really apply in all different kinds of cities. If it's MBS-based or CDM-based, the most important thing is cities needs to work with it and it needs to be secure and and make sure it's privacy. All the privacy demands are there.
Listen, there's one point or group of questions that I have that I want to really raise up, and that's the business side of things. There's clearly there are benefits of the data to cities, to the users, but most cities, at least Helsinki, does look at things and not just from traffic perspective, but and safety perspective, but also the local business ecosystem perspective. So everything we do should then also be a boost for some new business. Somebody needs to start making money out of it, create new jobs, all that. Now, looking at this topic of micromobility data and everything we've been talking about, this kind of a data ecosystem that this will lead into, is it going to be business for all stakeholders, not just Thibault, but we need everyone to benefit. Basically, also the mobility providers themselves. It needs to be beneficial for them. It doesn't. selling it, hopefully not. But we need different operators there, but we also need third parties, like now maybe fourth parties, to start building new services on top of this data that we collect and share. How are we getting there? What needs to be done? Sebastian, your study didn't go too much into that, did it? The business side of things.
No, but it is something that we think about, in the longer term, and I think you're really connecting what would be those that would get us to a mobility as a service of ecosystem, right? Where I think it's the same thing. Like, you need to start developing all of these standards that would allow collaboration across, different stakeholders, not only the ones that are producing the data or just the cities, but really able to make sure that all these data that is being produced can then be taken by someone else and built into something better and bigger than anyone of us can think of right now. But again, all of this goes back to that basic building block of you need to standardize. If we are not speaking the same language across everyone, it's going to be very difficult for anyone to build anything better.
Gemma, how does Amsterdam see the whole data as a platform to build new business type of approach? Oh yeah, Gemma, you're muted.
I think, well, the first priority of us is to keep a safe city and not really making sure that we have building new businesses. What we see also that the market is sometimes struggling on what the new businesses will be. We have a lot of talks also with car companies, and they also see that everything is changing, and they also see, well, we have new ideas, we want to test all those new ideas, but everyone is also in a kind of changing. Well, we are just having a next 10 years will be really, a lot of things will be changing, so everyone is also sorting out which kind of new business models are really working. And at this moment, as a city, we really don't have that overview of what is really working. That's why we do a lot of pilots. We test a lot. Not all the pilots are a success, but sometimes you just see that things are not working. Sometimes pilots are a success. Sometimes market parties want to test and pilot in the city, and they see opportunities, and sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work. So I think the next decade will be very a challenge, and just learning how to see it, where it's going to. I think everyone has ideas, but where it's really going to, I think that is not yet to decide, or not yet to know.
Yeah. Thibault, I've been teasing you a little bit because you're the only one making money out of this in this panel, but there's now is your time to say that.
It's difficult to make money working with the public sector.
I know, but
it's a conviction choice when you are a startup founder to do that.
So, but what should we do so that this becomes such an ecosystem that it's easier platform to build new business on? So to create the wealth that it basically data is the data is the new oil. That's something that we said a few years ago that doesn't make sense anymore.
I mean, we see, like, I mean, we've been contacted by automakers and fleet managers and car rentals company that are like, hey, by the way, now investing in telematics is going to cost us X million basically per year or more, and basically we need to recoup this money, and so we would like you to monetize our data, and let's see if cities basically interested in this data for traffic management purposes. So somehow, there also investment being made, and I think I don't know I think it's going to be net positive at the end, and this data will be bringing new businesses. Also, cities like by opening certain data basically externally could also help basically companies, startups, and so on using this data basically and then creating new services. So you need to have a good data governance. And the city itself could actually use this data to actually make money, not in selling data, but actually in monetizing the public space. Monetizing the public space is very important for cities. I mean, we're talking about a lot of investment here, for Amsterdam, but other cities like investing in data platform and like new employees and so on and so on. This has a lot of cost basically for the city and for taxpayers. How do you recoup cost? One of the things is like, if you look at Paris, actually, like, no, they're starting to charge for cafe terraces, for the cafes, setting up basically on the curb, the tables and so on. So it's all like the question about like how as a city you use data to monetize public space. And then depending on like how do you actually set the fees and so on, you can prioritize certain modes over others.
That's an idea. That's basically what I wanted out of you. Like, we need, because what we want, we need to break out of this standard model of there's a company and it has one customer, which is the city or the public sector, and then we share something and hope for the best. But we need to have more complex, multi-layered ecosystem on business-wise as well. And then that sounds good. Thank you. I was like hoping for that.
I would even say that the business model of cities will change. Huh?
Yes, especially in terms of data as well.
In terms of getting money,
Yeah. Yeah. True. Excellent. Now, as the last subtopic to cover, let's get back to my original questions that I had in the slides. So what if we are a new city who haven't really been doing this yet, like looking at the micromobility data? What would be the next steps? What are there's plenty of questions that where to start, where to learn more. Also, speaking of money, what does it cost us? Do we need to invest in something? How much? What is the cost benefit? These are the questions that every city traffic engineers have at one point anyway. Do we know all that, or is this such a kind of early phase that we don't really know that how to help other cities other than that just take a dive and hope for the best? I know we can always call Thibault and ask for help, but do we have Sebastian's website now? Sorry, I didn't yet manage to take a peek, but that has certain first steps, right, that we need to start doing. But I assume it doesn't cover everything, like some of the questions that have been discussed here, maybe like also like the business side of things and so on. But I think, do you recommend that as a first point to where to start with?
So, honestly, I do think that the first thing that, a city needs to answer with is like why and for what, right? That is the first thing.
Always.
Like, for what? So is this helping me or is it not helping me? And then, once you are able to answer that, then you can get to, okay, how do regulation? Is this something that I need to regulate? Is it not? And then to some of these other questions that we've been discussing, right? I guess back to your original point, I mean, all of these things cost money. And if you look at, the way some cities have been doing some of these things is, as Thibault was saying, to recover some of the money that it costs to manage. So you need, IT infrastructure, you need a bunch of stuff that will cost something. So at least that should be the starting point. But I do agree with Thibault, the business model of cities is going to change. Like the revenues that cities are getting from cars today might not be, that might not happen in the future. And you really need to adapt to what is coming next. But yeah, I think question number one should be why and for what. And that should be always central to what cities are doing. Because I think, something that I've been hearing, and I also hear a bit from you, Gemma, which is, like that power dynamic, which is like we need to keep control of this. And I think, that is interesting. And that is, something that is, worth exploring a bit more. But is the role of public sector keeping control, or is the goal of public sector, pursuing goals, right? So I think, again, keeping that question always in mind of why are we doing this and for what, and why is this helping us or not, has to be central across the process of anything.
Yeah. So, Gemma, I think you're mute again.
We should ask ourselves the question why. Actually, I also see a risk because we have a lot of discussions with policymakers in the Netherlands in all different kind of cities, and a lot of those policy makers don't really understand what we are doing. So I'm repeating the thing that we are doing with data exchanging, collecting data, getting more insights in data. We repeat that question over and over again. So we also need to educate and make policymakers aware of how the future might be and how we need to make the steps towards that future, and how they also need to change and adapt towards a more data-minded way of working. And if I ask a regular policymaker, do you need data? They always say no, because they're not used to using data. So we also need to let them see how they can use it. I think that's also a really big step for all the cities, I think all over in Europe to make. And even in Amsterdam, that is already difficult because our innovation team is really data minded and looking into the future. But the policy departments are just not really on that same level. So that is the gap. And we are building the bridge all the time. And I think we need to build that bridge for a long time. That's why we're always a little bit behind as governments than the market parties. And it's very important, Thibault, also for you to help us with that and to give a lot of good insights for cities and to show what data can add to policy making.
That's true. So start first with asking all the questions why. Would you agree that then the next questions to answer are how, and third one is who, because I think that's important as well. That at some point then you need to make the decision that are we going to do everything by ourselves? Do we have help from third parties? How do we going to then do this? But then I think that's something for there's a need for micromobility for cities one-on-one kind of handbook. Maybe Sebastian, that's something for you next.
You do have a lot of content already out there.
Yeah.
Whether this is from police or MF or us or others that basically tell you what are the best practices.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All right. I think we are slowly getting to the end of the session. Any final words, like sell yourself, or what's going to happen next in your particular neighborhood, or what do you want to say to, let's say, a city, to that where to start, or just be brave and bold? Ladies first, Gemma.
Thank you. I really would love to work with European cities and with the market parties to really make the next step in the smart mobility development. I think that would be, that would be my dream for now.
Yeah, I fully agree. Yeah. Thibault?
Yeah, I mean, if I would probably give an advice is that cities should work in an agile way, as we say in startups, so iteratively. It's going to be difficult for them to specify basically what's going to be this in 5 or 10 years. I'm talking product, but also policy, so I think it has to come in an iterative way. And you're talking about investment. Yeah, I mean, it can be basically a 5 million investment, or it can 50K or 80K investment, depending on what do you want to achieve, basically, in terms of how do you want to manage that, and which data do you want to collect, and so on. So yeah, I mean, on our side, very keen to keep the dialogue open and work with more cities, and then also very looking forward to test CDSM with the use case that would be implemented. And yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, try and learn. That's basically been our guideline as well. I fully agree with you. Sebastian, what's happening next? Example on this topic.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, one of the things I was surprised that we didn't end up discussing in this session was the privacy issues. You know, we kind of touched them a bit.
I left it. If there's nothing else, we will go into that.
Yeah,
there will be no end to it.
Yeah, but this is something we're actually working.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Together with the Open Mobility Foundation and with NAFSA, the North American Bicycling Association, with a set of private sector stakeholders, include people like Uber, Lyft, some of the shared scooter operators and shared bike operators, as well as cities, and we're just putting together a set of privacy principles. So it's something that should help everyone that's starting down this pathway really think about privacy from the start and not leave it as an afterthought. So we expect to have something ready in the next couple of months. In the next couple of months, we should have something ready. So this is something that, again, it's going to be public. And what we would expect is that all of these cities and companies that are working with us wouldn't. So it's something that would work both for public and private sector institutions. So it's not just for the public sector. It is really for everyone. And here we'll be talking about, some of those important things around privacy, about you really defining, your objective, really defining why you're using data. Really, making sure that you are including the people that normally haven't had voice in these. So normally, marginalized communities in the past, and really making sure that you can include their voices and that you're really incorporating what they think about, privacy and a few other principles that we're working on. So I think it's going to be really, impactful, hopefully.
That's good news. I'm really looking forward to it. Let's pay attention to that. Thank you. So we had no extra questions from the audience. As I understand, everything will be recorded. It will be available afterwards. Also, you can see the slides from there. So at this point, thank you for joining. And thanks for the really good discussion. And let's wait for the next steps. There are many more to come on this topic.
Thank you, Sami, for your invitation.
No worries.
Thank you. Bye-bye.